Hi, and welcome to a talk from me. My name is Nuno Pinheiro. I'm a UI, UX designer. I dabble with 3D, iconography, lots of different things. QML, I've trained a lot of designers in QML over the years. I think I gave the first ever QML training for designers almost 10 years ago or something. Well, it seems like forever. Um, and yeah, this talk will be mostly about my experience with Qt Design Studio and what I love about it, what I think could be improved, and in a good way or in the biggest way, I would like to talk a little bit about how the designers work in the development cycle, the difference between the theoretical work methodology that Qt Design Studio implies and what it entails in reality. How does it really work with real products, at least in my experience. I've been told to let you guys know that if you have questions, you should type those questions in the chat box during the presentation. We'll go over it at the end. I think we'll have time. I hope we will. And that would be a good thing because I don't know all of it. I would like to know your opinions about this problem. This is a very complicated problem. And it's a problem that has been going on for years, and we still don't have like all the solutions at all. So whatever works for me might not work for you guys, but at least by engaging in communication, working together, maybe we can reach better conclusions and better work methodologies while trying to achieve good UIs and good user experience for our users. So please do not forget to let your question in the chat. So in this talk, we will do a simple 3D application, and we will do that simple 3D application on the theoretical low-end hardware, in a way to, well, first show off how great Qt Design Studio is and how it is easy to pick some assets, bundle them together, and have a working UI, but then also to expose some of its limitations, some of the things that don't work as well as it should, and maybe propose some solutions, either from the Qt design perspective as a whole, as a tool that could be improved, obviously, but also as a designer, what you can do, and that's probably more helpful right now, what we can do to improve the situation. So first thing, I love QML. I really do love QML. It's an awesome tool to make me expressive, to enable me to communicate better with the user, to do UIs that are engaging, that are fun, that are that serves a purpose and serves what the user wants, or at least what I believe the user wants. So, and it's a great tool for me to be able to communicate with my developers. So that's something that I always loved about QML. Even though we sometimes have attritions, it's a much easier way for me to communicate with my developers. The problem is that sometimes it gets a little bit lonely, because I would like to have thousands of designers working with QML. Because if I love them, I love designers, but if I love QML, maybe they would too. And from my experience, my teaching experience, there's always a certain percentage of designers that, like me, love it. And that's amazing. And it's a pity that there's not a ton of us. And part of it, like, why is there not a ton of us? And is because, first off, not all designers are the same. Some of them are really big into coding. Even though QML coding is really easy, But just the fact there is coding visible, it's actually scary for a lot of designers. And so I don't get all the designers in, and I always thought that Qt Creator was a really good way of luring them in. But the current landscape of work, let's not look, without looking even at Qt Design Studio, across the industry is not great. It's not great because, as I said, not all designers are the same. There we have graphical designers, 3D designers, 3D modelers, animators, a bunch of different people using a bunch of different tools. And whenever we use a specific tool, we kind of create our own realm of what we do, and that tool produces deliverables. And if we use our tool and we do our work correctly, we in theory have done our job. That removes a little bit of the ownership of the product. So your product is your interaction with that tool. Say a 3D designer will be Blender. So we will create some 3D assets, some 3D scene, maybe generate the GLTF, send that to the user interface guy, designer, and you will do what with it? So the 2D person won't have a lot of experience on 3D, so chances are high that it will ask the 3D designer to do a few captures, so some static captures of the 3D scene, so he can actually bundle them into his 2D mockup. And this creates problems because this bridge that I just established here was based on two very different assets. One was a static render, like a specific static render of a scene, and the other one is the scene itself. The UI designer will have access mostly to the 2D scene, a very non-interactive asset that he's very comfortable with. Me, as mostly a graphical designer, I will be super comfortable with a 3D scene that exists only as a screenshot. I'll pick that up, import into my design, put it there, all good, create a new asset or a new series of assets based on that 3D scene, and create 2D mockups that I send maybe to a motion designer so that they can do transitions from one state to another state. But that now is missing something. Like the 3D scene is now converted to 2D image, and maybe I've created two mockups with two different 2D scenes, and the 3D guy, the motion designer is now like, how should I transition from one static image to the other static image? Because the software that we are all using is not the same. Like I'm using, say, for example, on the 2D part, Figma, the 3D guy used Blender, and now the motion designer is using a different software to do it. And every time we have these bridges, we lose communication. We lose a little bit of what we're trying to say when we're talking to each other. That's not a great thing. And it mostly removes ownership, like total and complete ownership of the product from each of the intervening parties. They do their job in their tool correctly, and that's it. And that's bad. And it's something that we all experience, and everybody kind of knows this. And if we look at the designers versus developer, then it becomes super obvious, because these are things that I've experienced over my life, of opinions that designers and developers have of each other. Like, it's not uncommon for a designer to think that, are the developers blind because I produced a couple of mock-ups and I sent to the developer, and the result has nothing to do with it. And the developer thinks that it's exactly the same, and the designer thinks that the developer is blind. So, and why is that? It's because developers are blind. No, it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's because of experience. It's because there's a lot of information missing most of the times. There's a lot of things that designers do sometimes that it's cheating, like we always pick the ideal amount of text for a certain UI. We always pick the best angles possible for a certain UI. And then when that UI is created in reality, those things are exposed. The problems are exposed. The text that was Laura Ipsum to begin with now is a sentence that is 3 lines long and doesn't fit the space you've designed for it. And for the designer, maybe the solution is quite easy. For the developer on the other side, he's just done what was in the mockup. He saw a text area and created a text area for that. So the problem is who did the wrong thing here? None. Like the designer expected the developer to do the small alteration that obviously was needed. The developer saw that the requirement was for a text box of that size. So maybe the problem was on the designer. Anyway, but the mindset is radically different. Designers usually, I always loved a little animation there was about designers and developers, and the designer was looking at things like this, sideways, while the developer was looking at things like this, up and down, which relates to the fact that designers are maybe trying to look at the context of an application, seeing how the user will think about it. Is it cool enough? Is it engaging enough? Versus a developer that is trying to think if the application is maintainable, how does it scale, how it will work and behave in the future, how can I make this quickly enough? And to be honest, the developers do have a point sometimes about their general grievances with designers, because designers change their mind a lot. So they would wish, a developer would wish that we would come up to a conclusion sooner and not force them to keep on having to change a UI because they change their mind. And also there's a little bit of a big barrier, language barrier here. When two designers are talking to each other, sharing a couple of images tends to be enough. We obviously know what sort of visual language we're talking about when we see a mock-up. We know that entails a certain amount of UI patterns and UX patterns just from a couple of images. And it's not trivial to explain that to a developer, unless he has experience in these sort of things or has a knack for it. It's hard. It's really hard to explain all of the minutiae that comes with this sort of communication. So I guess you understand that this is a little bit complicated. And it's been complicated for many years. And Qt Creator saw this complication many years ago again, and tried to save us from it. And it created a tool within Qt Creator, which I think is still available. Maybe it's not available anymore, which was a little designer tool that would allow you, a designer, to drag and drop components, put it in the scene. It already had some of a previous implementation of what we have now with the Figma importer and other importers. So back then there was no Figma, but there were importers for, say, Photoshop or other tools of that nature. And it will allow basically for a designer working in Photoshop to press a couple buttons and get a QML on the other side. That was supposed to help us, and it did in a way, but it never picked up quite a lot. And The reasons are complicated to explain. Maybe there wasn't enough interest from designers into the tool to keep on working at it. But for a few years, it was mostly abandoned. The code that it generated wasn't the best. So that also made the developers not too happy with the solution. Some years pass, and now we get Qt Design Studio. So maybe this time. What is Qt Design Studio? Well, Qt Design Studio is pretty much Qt Creator. It's Qt Creator with some other functionality. So a lot of work went into the import tools. So now they are theoretically better. And I think, this is my opinion, that a good part of this came from the fact that we are going to have to integrate 3D. And if we are going to have to integrate 3D into our work methodology, we need more tools. We need to see the 3D. We need to play with it. We need to put things in the right position, look at that. So this implies that the UI mockup area needs to at least contain the 3D aspect of it so that we can set the lights, move the 3D object, move the cameras, all of those things that are mandatorily necessary in order to create a working UI that incorporates 3D. So the Qt company actually completely needed to work on this. So a lot of things were done, and were done good, in order to make this work this time. So demo time. What can possibly go wrong? It's like the fourth time I do this. Okay, so here we have the scene that I could have exported from Figma into Qt Design Studio. Nothing special here, just a couple of images. I've done a few things to make the window borderless, nothing special. There's a couple of arcs going on, really good trivial stuff. Okay, so now let's try to import a TLTF file into our application. Just drag and drop it, press import. I might have done this in the past a few times. So let's just overwrite the files and import it. So all of that is fine. It should be here. So that's our cloud. Well, let's try to import something 3D into our scene. Okay, so let's put a View 3D object here, center it, and that should be fine. That's a cube. Probably not what I want. What I really, really want is my cloud. So I'm going to put my cloud inside my scene. I don't see anything. Interesting. But, okay, let's think this through. The scale that my designer created this, it's the scale that was benefit to her. So, and she also exported a camera. Maybe I could use the camera. That would save me the work of trying to fiddle with the scale to get a good view, and just try to use the same camera that she exported. So I really don't need a scene. Oh, there we go. I actually see something. So it was on top of my object. So even though there's no visible aspect to it. It's black. Well, it's black because there's no lights in it. So let's just try to go inside of my cloud. Okay, here we have our 2D scene, our object. So the first thing I'm going to do is maybe use the same camera. So I need to export the camera. So I know there's a camera here somewhere. There we go. There we have. There's a camera. There's a bunch of animations. And I already know that not all of them are enabled. So let me enable all of them, because for some reason, not all of my animations are running. Okay, so now all of my animations are working in theory. And finally, I just need to export my camera. To use the same camera, I'm just going to create a property. I'm going to call it camera, and that's it. So I'm going to do a property. It's going to be called N because I'm gonna. Now, what's the name of the camera? I had it here. It's maybe camera orientation. Yeah, camera orientation. That's my camera thing. Copy. Okay. Let's put it there. V, camera orientation, maybe with a C. So the only things that are missing currently is that I have no lighting conditions. So if I remove the lights, that you see. So I actually need a couple of lights here to be able to be seeing something. So first one, I'll put a light just on top. Let me push it upwards. Okay. And now another light that I'll put on inside the camera, so it follows the camera along. So inside the camera, just another light. That's fine. So in theory, let's just look at this from other angles, see if everything's fine. Okay, I'm going to move the camera light. Yep, that is the light level. Let's go there, there. That should be fine. Okay, now let's go back to our main file. So if I go into the navigator and find my main app, let's see. If I press play, what happens? So that was easy, right? Talking about easy, it was a little bit too easy. Two things. So you notice that I created a property for the camera, but never got to use it. I should have used it. I was expecting to have to use it to go into View 3D and assign that camera to it. But it worked anyway. So my guess was that once I deleted the scene, it picked up the camera that it had available, and that worked. That's why you saw it the moment I deleted the scene that was existing in the cube, you immediately saw the cloud on the right perspective, on the right camera. So I'm guessing that's what happened there. The only thing that I had I still had to do to go to the cloud itself, the cloud component created, because the animations were not running, and I need to set up a few lights there. But it worked, which in a way kind of explains the dangers of this. If this was actual code being generated and the developer would have to look at this code, it would be confused. Like, where's the camera coming for? What camera is driving this this cloud thing? It's all magic. So probably in the View 3D, it's a good idea to just point to the scene, which would be the camera, the cloud, and point to the camera inside that scene. That would be a little bit better code that the developer can understand. Anyway, that was easy. So what's the problem? Okay, let's compare things. You might notice that it's not exactly the same. Okay, the colors are off. And the colors are off because, as I told you guys, I got this render from the 3D artist. And that was done using cycles. The rendering isn't exactly the same as the rendering I get from the 3D engine. Plus the lights are not the same, so colors are off. And I might have here a version of a scene that was rendered before he made a few changes. So sorry. Yeah. A few other things are different. This thing here has color, and there's also a glow around it. I didn't do it here because the coloring of the arc easy enough. I can paint the arc in any color I want. the glow would imply tricks. And as I said, like I'm trying to simulate here a situation where the hardware is limited. So in a case where the hardware is limited, we could even have no hardware acceleration. So if we have no hardware acceleration, probably the 3D wouldn't work. There's ways around it. We could do maybe encapsulate this 3D animation into a video or a animated image and control that. So that would be much easier. I have a series of videos that I'm trying to publish on this matter on how to fake 3D for low-end hardware. But the glow effect, that really requires a blur effect. Those tend to be expensive. So I'm not doing it here. Another thing that I want to show you guys is that notice that, okay, my cloud here on the mockup looks pretty and all good because I've used the asset in the most ideal way. On the real thing, the teardrops just disappear. Not teardrops, the raindrops disappear into nowhere. That's not nice. It would be nicer if they would fade out, but and maybe the entire cloud could fade out. But that's expensive because that would require a opacity mask, which not the most expensive effect out there. But if you have no hardware acceleration, it's still something that is tricky to achieve. But designers to the rescue. Let me show you quickly my drawing application where I do my other things. I'm beginning to do a lot of controlled undos now. So this is my masking element. I just need to basically put it right where I want it to. That you're seeing in the background is a copy, a screenshot of the application. I just merged those two elements. I placed this copy of the background underneath. I applied it as a mask. Now you have this, right? And this works just as well, right? It does create the effect that we're running for. So all I need now is to export the image. Luckily, I already did this. And we're going to try to use it on the drawing itself. Okay, so there. Go, import that image. Yes, I already had it, as usual. Let's just put it here on top of our object. And if I press play, it is working. So that was fun, right? And that shows you why designers actually is a good idea to include them into the development process, because they might come up with different solutions for problems that are present and presented into applications. Because the truth is that designers tend to do their things in almost a vacuum if they're not presented with the actual problems. And they do it in the vacuum of the silos, the applications that designers are used to work with. But that is all good and fantastic unless you come up into these problems and you find out that things have to change because time changes and you have user feedback, you test the thing and then you realize that grand ideas that you had don't work anymore. You realize that the hardware is not capable enough to do a thing and you have to do changes. And it's a good thing because you can, if the designer is part of this development process, you can do things like I've just shown you. But there's a danger here, the danger of Qt Design Studio. The method that we've been using where we get an export from, say, Figma, say, GLTF or 3D, and we transform that GLTF, that Figma file, into QML, it kind of works as a one-way street. There's an interesting thing that we do, like it's a different project we have in KDAB, which is Quizza, which that's what the reason why is a GLTF file. So in Quizza, the Quizza pipeline, we actually, when we import the GLTL file, we don't do anything to it. It's still the same GLTL file. We use the GLTF file, right? Very much the same way we use a PNG, right? We just use it. We don't modify it. Therefore, any changes that we make are completely non-destructive. If the designer changes the PNG file or the GLTF file, it still works. So it changes, it does this work on the GLTF file, just import it back. And if the hooks are all well managed, things work. If the name of the file is the same, it still works. If the GLTF files, the inner properties are named the same, all of the UI works. It implies communication between the developer and the designer or the implementer of the on the UI side and the 3D modeler. They still need to communicate in order to make these things work, but it potentially can work. Versus this method, where it gets transformed into QML, and it's slightly more dangerous because you can actually do modifications in the QML to the basic component. Say you've done an amazing and a huge work in Figma, and you created very well-defined objects, and the designer on this side, or the developer on this side, decided to change the button because of feedback. The contrast on the screen wasn't good enough, and we needed to increase the contrast levels on the button. And we do it on Qt Design Studio, because this is where we're working. Now, the designers on the Figma side, because not all designers are the same, have no idea about this. And this is dangerous. We need to keep the bridge alive. And this is why it's vitally important to have a technical artist. That's the missing sauce that we've been missing from the beginning. An artist, a designer that can actually work with Qt Design Studio, that knows what is going on, and that keeps this bridge alive. Okay? The bridge between the Figmas, the upstream silos, and the downstream application for a real application that changes. An application that gets feedback and user feedback that needs to be piped in back to the designers. So what works? What works, in my opinion, it's an opinion I had since forever, is ownership. I already mentioned it. Feeling that this is your baby. Everybody in the application development, from the designer to the guy that sends the application to the customers, to the guy that put the application on the store, it needs to feel that it's their baby. And this implies communication. This is where Qt Design Studio could help and potentially helps. Some things that help a lot is be very consistent on your naming, so that when you, for example, in Figma, create a button, you have something called the background, keep on calling it background, okay? So when we, possibly the technical artist or somewhere in between, tries to re-import the changes that were made into QML into the Figma files, that works in that direction from QML manually into Figma. Hopefully in the future, all of this automatic, and into Figma to QML. Again, if you do a re-export. If you re-export and you figure out and you try to re-export just parts of it, and then you extract the component out of it and put it into your main application, all of that potentially work if you use consistent naming. Try to use atomic design principles in Figma or any tool that you desire, the tools that designers would like to use the best, and try to keep them sync. Atomic design is actually very close to the way things are created in QML. So you have your basic atoms that you build upon. You have a button, so you probably design a button, but if you think about it, a lot of other objects are kind of buttons. A radio button is a type of button. So this sort of reutilization of things makes our lives quite easy on the QML side of things and also on the Figma side of things. I do have a wish list. Ideally, we would have, which is not easy to achieve. This is like a wish list that is actually very, very easy to say, harder to do. Because I would wish that things were more load. I would load more of the GLT. I would load a GLTF. I would load a Figma file. I would not import the Figma file and transform it into QML. So ideally, the Figma file would have objects that I could interact with, and I could change some properties and feed that back into the Figma file. I would save directly into the Figma file when I would use the application or press save, and that could be shipped back to the designer, seeing they would see the changes that I made that are relevant for them. Some of the things that it's just random things that Qt Design Studio could do better. Easy testing, that's a big one. Would be really nice. I have a tool that I've created, which is just a glorified loader that allows me to place a QML in a server, have an app that I have running on my phone, point to that server, run the QML directly there, and that allows super easy testing, no need of huge setup. I just share my QML code, put it in an app, run and goes. Better data. That would be awesome if we have better data. You notice, and this is to fight designers that fake data. It's really easy for a designer, again, to pick fake text that fits the UI perfectly and data that fits their UI needs perfectly. Real data is much better, and being able to simulate real data without having to create a C++ component is a plus. The current models is a little bit limited. I wish I could have at least a table model available in QML just for testing, just for creating objects and testing real or closer to reality data. Don't forget about the something that I really wish would not happen, which is this Qt Design Studio to Qt Creator as an export. If we could make a seamless transition from Qt Design Studio into Qt Creator and be able to keep on using the same project, we would be able to create a better technical artist. One that understands the developers better, one that understands the struggles of developers, and vice versa. Developers start to understand the struggles and the difficulties from the designers because there's an interesting party there on the code. So that would be really good. I see a danger of Qt Design Studio being starting to become just an application that creates mockups. That and application that creates mockups with really bad code. And what happens in those situations is, unfortunately, if the code is really bad or really very hard to read or bad, it might look pretty, but it can be actually bad. The developers will look just at the results. They'll press play, look at the results, ignore the code. And what happens more often than any time is that the developer won't test all of the things that the designer has done on the mockup. So he gets a rough approximation of what was intended, and then he reinterprets and recodes it into nicer code, but that is missing a lot of functionality. and probably be on the wrong position, on the wrong size, and not at all what was intended. So, reaching my conclusions, I think Qt Design Studio is a big step in the right direction. It's awesome. It's great because it allows designers to be creative. It allows designers to create so much more interesting UIs and such more engaging user interactions that we can actually hook them and make them start to learn code, maybe without the design actually starting to learn how to code, because QML is super easy. It's actually really, really easy. And there's always, in my experience, if I'm teaching a class of 10 designers, at least one or two will be super into the pure nitty-gritty QML code, even starting to be fussy about the way the code looks and how readable it is. So there's always a couple that really go into it, and they will be the guys that will be able to bridge designers and developers. They are super important. Another thing I want to say is, let's be careful about the over focus of Qt Design Studio experience, like this storytell of the thing that I just did in the demo, which was really easy, versus how it really works in the entire project. So let's focus more on the entire project and less on this nice story that you just export, boom, 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 done. It isn't quite like that, and it's not the greatest way to explain what Qt Design Studio if you say it like this. Just realize that I also said it like this. But it's a nice story. It's really easy. It's really engaging to tell. So I understand completely why we want to say it like that. But be mindful, it's not completely like that. We still have to take care of the details. We still have to take care of the social aspects, and we need working mechanisms. We need to establish who does what, how does it go from A to B, how do we go from B to A again, and how do we establish meaningful ways of communicating back and forth. And that was my talk. So I don't know if I said this, I work for KDev. Anything, you can contact me on my email, which is nono@kdev.com. So hope you enjoyed my talk. See you soon, and I'll be listening. I'll be trying to reply to the questions you just made. Okay, so see ya.